During the Miocene and Pliocene periods, spanning approximately 23 million to 2.6 million years ago, the Earth underwent profound climatic changes that shaped the evolution of marine life. During this time, the global climate was significantly warmer than it is today, and the planet's average temperature sometimes exceeded current levels by several degrees. The polar ice caps, much smaller in extent, did not hold as much water in the form of ice, leading to a significant rise in sea levels. Geological estimates suggest that sea levels could have been up to 50 meters higher than current levels in some areas. As a direct consequence of this rise, vast coastal zones formed, creating environments conducive to the proliferation of large marine predators. In this thriving aquatic landscape, the megalodon, a formidable shark whose size could exceed 18 meters in length, found an ideal environment for hunting, reproducing, and reigning at the top of the food chain. During the Miocene, the planet experienced a relatively warm and humid phase, which favored the expansion of tropical forests on continents and the development of rich grasslands in temperate regions. The seas, in turn, teemed with nutrients from terrestrial waterways and ocean circulation, facilitated by continental configurations. It is estimated that between 15 and 20 million years ago, the climate was stable enough to allow the flourishing of a great diversity of marine species. Giant sea turtles, present for millions of years, were just one example among the multitude of creatures evolving in these ecosystems. Primitive manatees, large baleen whales, and a significant variety of fish with extraordinarily diverse sizes and shapes also existed. This abundant fauna was partly due to the environmental warmth, which turned algae and plankton-rich waters into the base of the marine food pyramid. In this context, large sharks like the megalodon benefited from the abundance of prey during these periods. However, the transition to the Pliocene, spanning 5.3 to 2.6 million years ago, brought some changes. The global climate, though still warm, began a slight cooling trend, partly due to tectonic plate movements and the formation of new marine passages such as the emergence or closure of straits. For example, the configuration of the Isthmus of Panama, which was beginning to strengthen, altered currents between the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. Despite these changes, ocean temperatures remained high enough to support large marine animals in many basins. Therefore, most tropical and subtropical coasts and even some temperate zones continued to be largely favorable for the life of powerful and imposing marine species. This golden age of great marine hunters was characterized by the high productivity of coastal waters, complex food chains, and thriving ecosystems where competition for survival was fierce. In these vast marine environments, the extent of the coasts was a crucial factor. Higher than current sea levels formed large, shallow continental shelves, offering an incredible variety of ecological niches. Seagrass meadows, curved coral reefs, and other underwater structures provided shelter and food for countless fish and marine mammals. Pinnipeds, a group that includes seals and sea lions, thrived in many regions, taking advantage of shallow waters to hunt and rest on easily accessible shores. Some species, such as primitive whales and ancestral dolphins, evolved in these rich environments and diversified by exploiting abundant populations of fish and squid. All of these animals formed the main prey for a predator as formidable as the megalodon, which found here a massive reservoir to sustain its colossal metabolism. Many other sharks shared the megalodon's habitat during these periods. Some were considered significantly smaller than this giant. For example, there were ancestors of hammerhead and tiger sharks capable of hunting a variety of prey, but they rarely competed with the megalodon for the largest marine mammals. Interactions were not limited to intra-species competition among sharks. Predatory species such as primitive ancestors of orcas or other robust odontocetes could also compete for certain prey. Additionally, pinnipeds, often in groups, knew how to defend themselves collectively among seasonal ice or coastal rocks when possible. However, these animals could obviously not match the power of an adult megalodon in open waters where the latter dominated. In some cases, the megalodon had to contend with various survival strategies, but it never lost its dominant position in most warm and temperate oceans. The role of the megalodon in regulating marine populations should not be underestimated. Those who classify it as a superpredator emphasize that it likely influenced the distribution and migration of its prey by forcing certain species to avoid excessively risky hunting zones. By a cascading effect, the presence of the megalodon helped maintain balance among the different components of the food chain. By primarily attacking large prey, it allowed smaller fish to thrive in sufficient numbers to meet the needs of other intermediate predators. In this complex web, every fish, turtle, and species occupied a specific place. Secondary predators, such as some medium-sized sharks, contributed to preventing the overpopulation of certain fish species. The megalodon at the top of this pyramid controlled the main marine herbivores, thereby maintaining a dynamic in which overfishing or the temporary scarcity of a species did not necessarily lead to ecosystem collapse. Of course, these processes were the result of complex interrelationships. But the megalodon helped keep the balance from tipping too far in one direction or the other, ensuring a certain long-term stability until significant changes occurred later. Regarding its geographic distribution, fossilized teeth and vertebrae indicate that the megalodon was present on almost every continent. Researchers have found evidence of its presence in North America, South America, Europe, Africa, Asia, and Australia. Antarctica is an exception, as no confirmed discoveries have been recorded there to date. Several hypotheses could explain this absence. It is likely that the water there was too cold for most of the year for the species to settle, or that any possible presence has been lost in geological layers that are now inaccessible. In any case, the megalodon was particularly adapted to temperate and tropical waters, seeking milder temperatures that favored its metabolism. Some paleoclimate studies suggest that this giant preferred waters between 12 and 27 degrees Celsius. To understand the power and role of the megalodon in prehistoric oceans, it is essential to consider its exceptional size. The most widely accepted scientific estimates suggest that this giant shark could reach a maximum length of around 18 meters, although some paleontologists have hypothesized that individuals approached 20 meters. Sticking to the 15 to 18-meter range remains the most realistic according to most studies. This size placed it far above the average size of most modern sharks, including the great white shark, which often reaches a maximum of around 5 to 6 meters for the largest individuals. In addition to its impressive length, the megalodon had a colossal weight. Paleontologists estimate that an adult could weigh between 50 and 70 tons, far exceeding the weight of contemporary sharks. For comparison, a 6-meter great white shark usually reaches a maximum of 2 tons. The difference in weight, combined with imposing size, suggests considerable muscular power and an appetite matching its energetic needs. For reference, the whale shark, the largest living fish today, averages between 8 and 10 meters with a record close to 18 meters, but its planktonic diet does not compare to that of the megalodon. The latter was evidently a predator capable of attacking sizable prey, such as primitive whales or large marine mammals of its era. Estimates of the megalodon's size are primarily based on the study of its fossilized teeth and mathematical models. Researchers particularly rely on the correlation between jaw size and total shark length. Comparing the length of the tooth root or the height of the crown allows plausible size ranges to be proposed. Although fossilized cartilaginous skeletons are rare because cartilage does not preserve well, the abundance of teeth found at various sites worldwide has provided a solid statistical foundation. One of the most striking features of the megalodon lies in the shape and power of its jaw. Unlike many modern sharks, which already exhibit impressive bite force, the megalodon likely possessed the most formidable bite in shark history. Some modeling studies estimate that its bite could exceed 100,000 newtons, even surpassing 150,000 in certain calculations. To put these figures in perspective, a modern great white shark develops a maximum bite force of about 18,000 newtons, representing a colossal difference. This incredible power was reflected in an arched jaw equipped with multiple rows of triangular teeth. Megalodon teeth could measure up to 17 or 18 centimeters in height with finely serrated edges, perfect for slicing through thick flesh. The triangular shape, combined with a solid root, ensured great resistance to pressure when attacking enormous prey. Each jaw typically contained several functional rows and a reserve of replacement teeth at different stages of development, ready to replace them if lost. Sharks, including the megalodon, continuously renew their teeth throughout their lives, a vital cycle to compensate for wear from repeated biting of bones and carcasses. Fossilized whale bones with deep bite marks have been found, clearly attributable to a giant shark capable of tearing substantial chunks of flesh. Fossilized teeth arranged in an arc have also allowed the possible jaw width to be reconstructed. In museums, it is not uncommon to see megalodon jaw reconstructions over 3 meters wide, allowing an adult to stand inside easily. This image often captures the imagination and illustrates how the prey of that era could be swallowed or severely mutilated in a single attack. Although commonly associated with tropical and temperate seas, the megalodon likely had the ability to hunt at different depths. Its enormous size required high energy consumption. It could therefore follow the migrations of whales or other large marine mammals moving from relatively shallow waters, where some breeding occasionally occurred, to deeper zones where water temperature could be colder. One potential challenge was buoyancy. Modern sharks regulate their position in the water by combining the function of their squalene-rich liver with the lift generated by their pectoral fins. In the case of the megalodon, this lift had to be optimized to support its gigantic weight, requiring constant swimming and excellent directional control to avoid sinking too deep. The anatomical configuration of the pectoral fins to provide sufficient lift was probably similar to that of the great white shark, but on a much larger scale. This ability to navigate at various depths may have contributed to the species' success, allowing it to explore a wide range of habitats in search of abundant prey. While a cartilaginous skeleton is a common feature among all sharks, the size of the megalodon and other specific anatomical details show marked divergences compared to modern species. For example, the megalodon's snout or face was likely short and robust based on the structure of the great white shark, considered a distant analogue. Its eyes are also thought to have been proportionally large, as vision plays a key role in detecting silhouettes and movement underwater. Another notable distinction is the development of red and white muscles. Sharks in the Lamnidae family, such as the great white or mako, have a portion of red muscles near the midline, allowing them to maintain a slightly higher muscle temperature than the surrounding water through a form of regulation called regional endothermy. The megalodon likely had the same advantage, enabling it to operate in colder waters without losing too much muscular efficiency, thus tracking prey across wider areas. Regarding the megalodon's coloration, it is important to remember that in the absence of fossilized soft tissues, any reconstruction is based on assumptions drawn from modern sharks. However, predation and camouflage strategies observed in many contemporary species allow a plausible hypothesis: countershading, which involves a darker dorsal side and a lighter ventral side. This bicolor pattern, very common among marine animals, serves to reduce the animal's visibility in its environment. Viewed from above, the dark back blends with the generally deeper, darker water. Viewed from below, the light belly blends with the surface light. For a predator whose hunting method could involve approaching prey from below, this camouflage would have been valuable for surprising large fish. However, various alternatives are conceivable. Some sharks display more contrasting patterns, such as the tiger shark with its stripes. It is unknown whether the megalodon exhibited similar patterns or had a simple grey or blue tone. Given its size, it might not have needed complex patterns. Its power and speed were sufficient to capture most prey without resorting to excessively sophisticated camouflage. Nevertheless, evolution likely favored coloration that offered a minimal tactical advantage during hunting. If the megalodon was able to dominate the seas from the Miocene to the Pliocene, it was also thanks to a subtle balance between brute strength and hydrodynamics. With a body close to 18 meters, its water penetration coefficient had to be optimal to maintain sufficient cruising speed and surprise incredibly fast marine mammals. Primitive whales, despite their size, were not lacking in agility, and many smaller species moved in schools to evade predators. Thus, the megalodon had to optimize every swimming motion to approach silently and generate an explosive burst powerful enough to deliver a lethal bite. It is sometimes compared to a torpedo-launching submarine due to its considerable forward-projected mass. This feature, combined with jaws capable of exerting one of the greatest bite forces ever recorded, outlined the profile of a super-predator with virtually nothing to fear from contemporaries, except perhaps large groups capable of collective defense. Scarce fossil evidence of violent encounters, fractured bones, and multiple tooth marks suggests that the megalodon sometimes faced challenging prey, confirming once again the strategic importance of muscular power and hydrodynamics in its hunting arsenal. One essential element of the megalodon's diet consisted of marine mammals. In its time, whales of various sizes, primitive dolphins, and ancestors of seals, more widespread in coastal areas, were abundant. Whales of the era could reach considerable sizes, ranging from 5 to 15 meters, depending on the species and period. While some of these whales did not rival today's blue whales, they still represented a substantial source of fat and protein. Seals, on the other hand, were smaller but gathered in massive colonies near coasts, providing a regular food source for the megalodon when hunting in shallow waters. Dolphins of the era, whose size varied considerably, generally between 2 and 4 meters, were also an integral part of its diet. Scientists have confirmed the megalodon's predation on these animals through two types of evidence. On one hand, numerous bite marks found on fossilized whale bones show the imprint of enormous teeth, incomparable with most other large prehistoric sharks. On the other hand, the distribution of these bite marks, often located near pectoral fins or the tail, indicates a precise attack strategy to immobilize prey quickly. For marine mammals, mobility is essential, and areas near appendages or the spine remain critical points. This approach demonstrates a targeted hunting technique, confirming that the megalodon was not merely a scavenger. In addition to feeding on marine mammals, the megalodon attacked a wide range of large fish, such as tunas, primitive swordfish, large rays, and even other sizable sharks. Current estimates based on fossil remains suggest it did not hesitate to attack fast and powerful prey, such as prehistoric tunas over 2 meters long. Rays, some with impressive wingspans reaching several meters, typically concentrated near the seabed searching for crustaceans. The megalodon could ambush them by swimming at mid-depths, taking advantage of one of its main assets, powerful musculature that allowed it to dramatically increase swimming speed over short distances. As for other sharks, the megalodon did not spare its cousins. Its prey included less imposing shark species, possibly 2 to 3 meters long or sometimes even larger, depending on opportunities and competition present in its habitat. This tendency to attack different types of predators demonstrates that the megalodon indeed occupied the top of the food chain. No other cartilaginous fish rivaled it in the position of super predator. The megalodon had to rely on its power and size to surprise its victims. In fact, if prey perceived the presence of a 15 to 18-meter-long giant, it would flee immediately. A shark of this size could not depend solely on its top speed, as its size prevented it from competing with smaller, faster predators over long distances. Paleontologists, based on studies of the presumed musculature of these animals in the coastal habitats of the time, suggest that it often preferred the ambush technique from deeper waters. It likely remained below the prey's line of sight, using relative darkness to reduce the chances of being detected. When the distance to the prey became sufficiently short, the megalodon launched a brutal charge using its powerful muscles. Observations of some large modern sharks, such as the great white, indicate that a strike from the depths can occur very rapidly, often at speeds exceeding 30 or 40 kilometers per hour over a short period. Given its stature, the megalodon may not have reached these speeds for long, but its initial thrust had to be impactful enough to strike the prey before it could maneuver. This lightning attack tactic, combined with the element of surprise, remains the best hypothesis to explain how it dominated agile and fast marine mammals. Once contact was made, the megalodon had a significant advantage, an extraordinarily high bite force. Some researchers estimate that it could reach the equivalent of several tons per square centimeter, far exceeding that of large modern sharks. To visualize such a figure, consider that a modern great white shark, although formidable, exerts a maximum estimated pressure of about 1.8 tons per square centimeter. In the case of the megalodon, numbers 2 to 3 times higher are sometimes mentioned, although it is difficult to measure precisely a parameter that does not fossilize. This enormous pressure was explained not only by the robust jaw architecture, but also by powerful musculature attached to a cartilaginous skull capable of expanding and retracting. A single bite was often enough to inflict fatal internal injuries on sizable prey, whether small whales, large fish, or other sharks. In many cases, a classic predation technique involved striking first at the ventral face or dorsal region to sever the spinal cord or prevent any escape movement. The resulting blood loss or sudden paralysis ensured that the megalodon secured its prey without much resistance. Although imposing, the megalodon also relied on acute senses to locate and identify its prey. In modern sharks, vision plays a crucial role, especially in clear water or at a distance. While the precise visual capabilities of the megalodon are unknown, it is reasonable to assume it benefited from sensitivity similar to that of large predators like the great white, equipped with a retina adapted to contrasts in various aquatic environments. Its sense of smell was also vital, as sharks can detect minute concentrations of blood in water, sometimes in fractions of a part per million. A megalodon, searching for potentially injured prey or locating carcasses, could have used this sense to traverse long distances guided by the faintest trace of hemoglobin. The lateral line sensory canals along its body, similar to those of modern sharks, also helped it detect vibrations and movements of nearby swimming animals. Thus, despite its gigantic size, numerous lines of evidence support the idea that it was not merely a blind giant lunging at prey, but a highly specialized predator fully capable of exploiting an entire arsenal of senses. One of the main questions surrounding the megalodon concerns the possibility of cooperative hunting behavior. Some paleontologists and shark experts have hypothesized that occasionally multiple individuals could have joined forces to attack large whales or encircle groups of dolphins. This idea is based on analogies with certain marine mammals such as orcas, which hunt in groups, or on the assumption that some sharks may tolerate the presence of conspecifics where food resources are abundant. Fossils do not provide direct evidence of such behavior, as documenting cooperative hunting in the geological record is extremely difficult. However, some researchers suggest that sites where multiple megalodon teeth have been found associated with whale remains could indicate a collective feast. Nevertheless, caution is warranted, as the presence of multiple teeth may indicate the successive arrival of different individuals attracted by the same carcass. In nature, it is not uncommon for several sharks to feed on a prized prey without actively cooperating to capture it. Opinions, therefore, remain divided. Some believe the megalodon may have acted alone most of the time, but in the presence of particularly large prey or in regions where food was exceptionally abundant, temporary grouping of individuals may have occurred. Others speculate that aggressive and territorial behavior would rule out this hypothesis, suggesting these sharks avoided direct competition outside of reproductive periods. To shed more light on this debate, it is interesting to observe the modern great white shark. This shark primarily lives alone but may occasionally tolerate the presence of others when food is particularly abundant, such as around drifting whale carcasses. Some behavioral studies highlight that a hierarchy is established among sharks present. Size and arrival time at the feeding site often determine feeding priority. In rare cases, observations interpreted as a form of collaboration have been reported, although most scientists favor opportunistic coercion without actual organization. If the megalodon shared some of these behavioral traits, it can be assumed that it primarily hunted alone to avoid competition, given the magnitude of its dietary needs. Additionally, the simultaneous presence of several gigantic adults near the same prey could have led to violent conflicts due to stress caused by the scarcity of certain key prey. However, some paleontologists speculate that in areas with an abundance of fish or along whale migration corridors, temporary groups of megalodons could have benefited from a nearly coordinated action. One could initiate the attack to injure the whale, while others patrolled the surroundings to prevent the exhausted whale from escaping. This strategy remains speculative but illustrates the potential complexity of this extraordinary predator's behavior. Scientists have long debated how megalodons gave birth to their young. Today, the most accepted hypothesis is viviparity, a reproductive mode relatively common among large modern sharks. In this scenario, female megalodons carried their embryos inside their bodies, providing the young with a stable environment, protection from potential predators, and a continuous nutritional supply. This form of reproduction differs from oviparity, in which eggs are laid externally, and ovoviviparity, in which eggs develop in the uterus, but the embryos feed solely on the yolk reserves. In viviparous species, there may even be more elaborate nutritional exchanges between mother and embryos, offering a higher survival rate for the newborns, which often are born larger and more robust. It is estimated that young megalodons measured between 2 and 3 meters in length at birth. This figure may seem extraordinary, but it is worth noting that this was a shark that, as an adult, could reach 15 to 18 meters in length, with body masses ranging from 50 to 70 tons. By comparison, newborn great white sharks, whose adults reach around 6 meters, already measure between 1 and 1.5 meters at birth. This scale gives a good idea of the size newborn megalodons could reach, giving them a significant advantage over many competing predators of their time. The growth rate of the megalodon is one of the most intriguing questions for researchers. Rare analyses based on growth records, often inferred from striations in fossil vertebrae, suggest an estimated growth rate of 16 to 20 centimeters per year. Why is this figure potentially credible? In studying modern sharks, some large species exhibit growth rates of around 20 centimeters per year during their early years before their growth rate gradually slows down. For a gigantic predator like the megalodon, rapid growth offered several advantages. It could more easily escape most dangers, quickly establish itself in the food chain as a dominant hunter, and thus secure its own survival. However, this growth was not linear. Like many fish and sharks, the megalodon likely went through accelerated growth phases associated with periods of abundant food or metabolic changes linked to hormonal development. Growth rate may also have slowed near adulthood when energy was directed more toward reproduction than size increase. Determining the sexual maturity of the megalodon is challenging. Fossils generally provide only partial dentitions, sometimes vertebral fragments, but rarely offer direct clues about the exact age of reproduction. However, there is a consensus around a range of approximately 10 to 15 years for this giant shark to reach sexual maturity. Why is the process so long? Size plays a central role. In many shark species, including the great white and basking shark, individuals largely reach maturity when they achieve their critical size. For a megalodon whose estimated adult length is 15 to 18 meters, this milestone required significant energy resources and a long period of growth. The role of size in reproductive competition is crucial. In some modern sharks, males and females may cooperate in certain environments but also compete fiercely to mate. In the case of the megalodon, large size likely served not only as a factor of intimidation toward conspecifics, but also allowed easier dominance over reproductive zones. A larger male could have had more opportunities to mate, as well as a greater capacity to defend potential mates from rivals. From a female's perspective, competition for the best mates was probably as important as passing on the strongest genes, ensuring the survival of future generations. In this context, having a large size at sexual maturity, and therefore a robust and efficient body, represented a significant selective advantage. Given its size, megalodons likely followed a specific migratory route for reproduction, choosing areas rich in food and relatively safe for their young. Modern sharks often adopt nurseries, a type of protected zone to safeguard their offspring from environmental dangers. Due to their imposing size, megalodons had less to fear from predation but could still seek strategic locations to avoid competition and allow their young to benefit from abundant prey. Although these behaviors remain theoretical, they are based on observations of other large modern sharks that adopt similar strategies to maximize the survival chances of their offspring. After surpassing the stages of birth, early rapid growth, and sexual maturity, the question arises of the megalodon's lifespan. The most rigorous estimates suggest an average of 30 to 40 years. To reach this figure, scientists have relied on several approaches. On one hand, the study of growth rings in vertebrae allows an approximate age to be proposed for certain fossilized specimens. On the other hand, comparison with the life strategies and longevity of large modern sharks provides valuable clues. For example, the Greenland shark, although living in very different conditions, can exceed 200 years, while other medium-sized shark species rarely live more than 20 years. The megalodon would fall into an intermediate range, consistent for a superpredator with a high metabolism, an active lifestyle, and a constant need for prey to survive. However, several factors could influence the lifespan of each individual. First, injuries. Fights between male megalodons or between megalodons and other large marine predators could cause severe trauma. Despite its powerful musculature and formidable jaws, a megalodon could be injured during confrontations over food or access to mates. Deep bites or jaw fractures could compromise its ability to hunt effectively and significantly reduce its lifespan. In addition, food scarcity was a determining factor. An adult individual of 15 to 18 meters likely required enormous amounts of meat to maintain its metabolism and swim fast enough to track prey. If, for environmental, climatic, or migratory reasons, prey populations, primitive whales, large fish, etc., declined in a region, the megalodon may have been forced to travel long distances to find another marine fauna. In such circumstances, the balance between energy expenditure and caloric intake was crucial. The longer the journeys, the higher the risk of exhaustion or intense competition with other super predators, generating physiological stress that could shorten lifespan. Another often overlooked aspect is the problem of parasites and diseases. Modern sharks are sometimes infested with various parasites, both external and internal, which can affect their functioning. In the prehistoric ocean, the megalodon was not exempt from such threats. Marine parasites, certain viruses, or bacterial infections could weaken the organism, reducing its ability to hunt or defend itself. Furthermore, a weakened individual was more likely to die from a minor injury or fail to find sufficient food to restore its energy. Despite all these dangers, a megalodon that reached adulthood and found enough food could expect to survive 3 or 4 decades. This relatively long lifespan, combined with late sexual maturity, implied that the species needed to maintain a sufficient reproductive rate to compensate for infant and juvenile mortality. In the best-case scenario, each female could have given birth to several offspring during her fertile years, thus ensuring population renewal. However, these life cycle parameters also made the species ecologically demanding. A super predator of this magnitude required vast hunting territories and an almost uninterrupted food supply. To understand the evolutionary origins of the megalodon, it is important to remember that sharks are cartilaginous animals whose complete fossils are quite rare. However, their mineralized teeth are more frequently preserved in sediments, making them a valuable source of information. Paleontologists therefore rely on the study of these teeth to reconstruct the main stages in the emergence of giant sharks and establish links between different extinct species. According to various hypotheses, the megalodon belongs to a group of sharks known for their large teeth. These sharks already existed in older forms following the mass extinction event at the end of the Cretaceous, about 66 million years ago. During the Eocene and Oligocene, other sharks stood out, also leaving spectacular teeth, indicating the existence of a lineage of animals that would become progressively larger. To trace this lineage, 2 names are often mentioned: Otodus and Carcharocles. Otodus is a primitive genus that lived primarily during the Eocene, roughly 56 to 34 million years ago. It already had large, sharp teeth, but with a simpler shape with few or no serrations. Gradually, paleontologists observed the emergence of species with changes in dentition. Secondary serrations became visible, and the overall shape became wider and more triangular. It is in this context that the genus Carcharocles emerged, with which the megalodon was long associated under the name Carcharocles megalodon. However, some researchers prefer to call the species Otodus megalodon, arguing that it is part of a single lineage extending over a long period and characterized by a gradual transition in tooth shape. Over millions of years, a clear trend is observed. The jaw enlarges, tooth crowns broaden, dentition becomes more pronounced, and all signs indicate a diet that included large prey, such as primitive cetaceans or significant varieties of fish. This evolutionary trait reflects continuous adaptation to open environments and abundant food sources, characteristics of periods when Earth's climate was milder and sea levels higher, favoring the development of vast marine ecosystems. Teeth are the most tangible evidence scientists use to trace the evolutionary trajectory of these sharks. Many transitional fossils exhibit intermediate features. As we move up the chronological scale, we find more fossils showing dentition adapted for tearing thick flesh, particularly that of marine mammals. Specimens discovered worldwide, especially in North America, Europe, Africa, and Asia, tend to demonstrate that this anatomical change was not the result of an isolated local mutation, but rather a large-scale evolution in response to environmental pressures and the availability of substantial prey. This mosaic of fossils confirms that the increase in size and the specialization of dentition were gradual processes spanning millions of years, ultimately giving rise to one of the most formidable creatures the oceans have ever known. Another key point in understanding the evolution of the megalodon concerns the increase in body size. Primitive sharks of the Otodus lineage already measured several meters, often exceeding 3 or 4 meters in length, making them notable predators of their time. However, fossils of Carcharocles auriculatus, Carcharocles angustidens, and Carcharocles chubutensis show a clear trend toward enlargement, both in dentition and in the rest of the cartilaginous skeleton. Scientific estimates suggest that from the time of Carcharocles chubutensis, individuals exceeding 10 meters in length could already be observed. Subsequently, the megalodon, often considered the ultimate culmination of this lineage, reached colossal dimensions. It is often compared to the great white shark, Carcharodon carcharias, due to apparent similarities, particularly in presumed color, overall body shape, and powerful dentition. However, there are numerous controversies surrounding the exact classification of the megalodon. For a long time, it was included in the same genus as the great white shark, i.e. Carcharodon, hence the old name Carcharodon megalodon. It was believed that these two superpredators belonged to the same direct lineage. However, more recent research, focused especially on the fine structure of the teeth, their serrations, and how the tooth root was implanted in the jaw, tends to show that there is a significant evolutionary gap between the modern great white and the megalodon. Great white shark teeth, although serrated, differ in the fineness of their edges and do not have the same width-to-length proportions as megalodon teeth. Therefore, the great white may belong to a distinct lineage, closer to other macro-predatory sharks, while the megalodon could be part of a different family tree, that of Otodus. This controversy is not merely a matter of terminology, it affects our overall understanding of evolutionary dynamics within the lamniform group, an order of fusiform sharks that includes, among others, the mako shark, the great white shark, and the megalodon. Scientific debates have sometimes been intense and boil down to two main positions. On one hand, some experts believe that the striking resemblance, often termed evolutionary convergence, does not necessarily imply direct kinship. On the other hand, some insist on marked similarities in tooth shape and possible cranial morphology to group the two species more closely on the evolutionary tree. Unfortunately, the absence of a complete fossil skeleton, combined with the cartilaginous nature of shark skeletons, greatly limits the possibility of conducting more advanced tests. Unlike the bones of animals with ossified skeletons, shark cartilage fossilizes only in exceptional cases. Essentially, we have access to traces, mineralized fragments, or partial jaw remains. Finding DNA in these fossil materials is unthinkable, as this nucleic acid is extremely poorly preserved. Organic molecules degrade rapidly over time, and to date, paleontologists cannot extract usable DNA from a shark a few million years old. Consequently, the significant debate over the true kinship of the megalodon will remain open until exceptionally well-preserved fossil specimens are discovered under unprecedented conditions or revolutionary techniques emerge. At this stage, our knowledge is based on the comparative examination of fossil teeth and, much more rarely, vertebral fragments that may have partially mineralized. Long before modern science recognized the existence of the megalodon, giant fossilized teeth were already collected by enthusiasts or ordinary coastal residents. In medieval Europe, there was no solid naturalistic explanation for their origin. Imagination prevailed, and these large teeth were sometimes called dragon tongues or even stone tongues. They were considered extraordinary relics, sometimes attributed with supposed magical or therapeutic powers. Princes and clerics preserved them as curiosities, occasionally polishing them or setting them as jewelry. It was only during the Renaissance, with the emergence of the first geological and paleontological studies, that it was understood they were fossilized shark teeth. From the 17th century onward, scholars such as Nicholas Steno showed great interest in these fossils and published pioneering works on the nature of these remains. This was a turning point in the understanding of life's history, as the existence of extinct beings challenged many preconceived ideas about the fixity of species. The mechanisms that led to the extinction of the megalodon remain one of the great mysteries of marine paleontology. To contextualize the megalodon, it is important to know that this species evolved in significantly warmer and relatively stable waters during the Miocene, roughly between 23 and 5.3 million years ago. During this period, our planet experienced a generally milder climate than today, favored by particular ocean currents and higher carbon dioxide levels compared to current levels. Gradually, toward the end of the Miocene and the beginning of the Pliocene, around 5 million years ago, the Earth entered a more pronounced cooling cycle. As a thermophilic shark, meaning it preferred warm temperatures, the megalodon faced a progressive decrease in favorable marine zones. This cooling was not abrupt from a human perspective, as it lasted hundreds of thousands of years. However, on a geological scale, it was enough to profoundly alter ocean ecosystems. Polar ice caps began to expand. Ocean currents shifted their courses, and the average ocean temperature dropped several degrees. It is complex to determine the exact water temperature in the regions frequented by the megalodon, as no fossil thermometer exists. However, analyses of sediments and microorganisms clearly indicate a global cooling of between 2 and 4 degrees, depending on the region. For an animal whose thermal comfort zone was estimated between 12 and 27 degrees Celsius, this decrease could significantly reduce its distribution area. As the planet cooled, warm seas became scarcer, and some migratory routes of essential prey may have been altered. Whales, considered by many scientists as one of the megalodon's primary food sources, began adapting their movements to new climatic balances by migrating to colder waters, potentially better oxygenated, and offering other advantages such as abundant krill or small fish. Consequently, it became more difficult for the megalodon to follow its prey over long distances, as the species itself, due to its physiology, still relied heavily on relatively warm marine areas. Climatic cooling was not the only significant change marking the end of the Miocene and the beginning of the Pliocene. Simultaneously, major geological modifications occurred, including the gradual emergence of the Isthmus of Panama. This was a crucial event prior to the full formation of the land bridge connecting North and South America. The waters of the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans were widely interconnected at tropical levels. This passageway, still open about 10 million years ago, began to close, becoming nearly impermeable around 3 million years ago, thus creating a major barrier for marine species. The immediate consequence of this land emergence was the redirection of ocean currents. The Atlantic became isolated from the Pacific, regulating salinity and temperature differently in each of these two major basins. Marine organisms, which previously had freedom to migrate between oceans, were blocked or considerably restricted. For a superpredator like the megalodon, accustomed to extensive hunting grounds, the reduction of these maritime passages meant a disruption in the distribution of certain prey populations. For example, the flows of pelagic fish schools were altered. Marine mammals changed their migratory routes, and marine habitats experienced changes in salinity, which could influence species distribution on a large scale. As the Isthmus of Panama gradually closed, global geography redrew coastlines, expanded or reduced certain inland seas, and transformed ocean circulation. As previously extensive warm waters became concentrated in smaller areas, the megalodon was forced to concentrate in fewer territories suitable for its physiology. Fossil records indicate, in fact, that this giant shark preferred to hunt in marine areas with relatively high temperatures, particularly in semi-coastal zones rich in marine mammals. The reduction of suitable habitat could have caused several significant difficulties. First, intraspecific competition, that is, between megalodons themselves, could have increased in these narrower, more crowded areas. Next, competition with other large predators, such as sharks more resistant to cold or predatory marine mammals, also intensified. Finally, as warm zones were further from the coast or more dispersed, megalodons likely had to travel greater distances to find the amount of food necessary to maintain their colossal mass. This energetic logistics, already heavy for an animal of this size, probably became increasingly burdensome in an impoverished or fragmented environment. Most paleontologists agree that marine mammals, particularly whales, were an essential part of the megalodon's diet. Fossilized tooth marks found on whale bones confirm the supershark's predatory activities in these areas. As the climate transformed, many whale species saw their distribution areas shift or fragment in search of new resource zones and thermal stability. For example, some whales adapted to colder habitats, probably rich in krill and small fish, while other migratory populations may have evolved toward routes less accessible to the megalodon. With whale populations constantly moving and in some cases declining, the availability of large prey risked placing the megalodon under a form of nutritional stress. An individual between 15 and 18 meters long, with presumably very high daily energy requirements, could quickly find itself in trouble having to cover longer distances to find suitably sized prey. Periods of fasting would have lengthened, increasing vulnerability to disease and injury and limiting reproductive capacity. Another aspect of this theory lies in the general decline of marine biodiversity at the end of the Pliocene, partly linked to cooling. With the extinction or rarity of certain whale species, the entire food chain suffered, and the megalodon, at the top of the pyramid, likely faced significant consequences. Therefore, this pressure on food resources appears to have been a key factor in the possible disappearance of the largest shark of all time. In addition to the decrease in available prey, the megalodon undoubtedly had to face numerous competitors, both emerging and existing. It was during this critical period that new lineages of predatory whales and large hunting populations began to diversify. Fossils reveal the existence of carnivorous populations with robust teeth capable of attacking large prey. Let us not forget the distant ancestors of orcas, more commonly known as ancestral killer whales, who also joined the race as superpredators. The megalodon could have felt intimidated by these marine mammals, which, despite their smaller size, hunted in groups or employed encirclement strategies. For a solitary shark, attacking a structured and coordinated group represented a greater risk of failure or injury. Once an animal as large as this began accumulating injuries, its hunting ability decreased further, trapping it in a vicious circle, increased difficulty finding food, decreased reproductive capacity, and ultimately population decline. During the Miocene and Pliocene, it is important to note that not all whale populations were peaceful filter feeders. The diversification of predatory lineages, some with very carnivorous diets, likely intensified food competition. Scientists, for example, mention the existence of a family of predatory whales capable of attacking prey of sizes similar to those targeted by the megalodon. The fossil of a creature called Livyatan melvilli, a prehistoric whale with a powerful jaw and gigantic teeth discovered in Peru, illustrates how the oceans also harbored other major potential hunters. With an estimated length of over 13 meters and a skull nearly 3 meters long, this whale could easily rival a large shark or even threaten the megalodon under specific circumstances. This competition resulted in a redistribution or even a reduction of available marine resources. New predators, often more adaptable to temperature variations or capable of covering long distances quickly, exploited niches that the possibly less versatile megalodon could not. Faced with a scarcity of whales and the emergence of rival predators, total food resources became limited in areas favorable to the megalodon. It is estimated that a large individual had to consume an amount of food proportional to its colossal weight over the course of a year, potentially several tons of prey. Considering periods of fasting when a local ecosystem suffered a shock, such as a massive migration of whales to colder or richer waters, the megalodon would see its food supply decrease almost overnight on a geological scale. Paleontological data, although sometimes open to interpretation, support the idea that adaptability is crucial under such circumstances. Some marine predators, like modern orcas, can change their diet seasonally, switching from fish to marine mammals or cephalopods, depending on availability. In contrast, the megalodon, specialized in capturing large prey, did not appear to be as opportunistic. Another key point in this competition is the possible superiority of social marine mammals. Modern orcas, for example, are known for cooperative hunting behavior, organized pods, stable groups, and remarkable social intelligence. Even in the era of the megalodon, or slightly earlier, ancestral orcas must have been developing early methods of collective hunting, giving them better chances to capture large prey. For a solitary superpredator like the megalodon, facing a group was probably far more dangerous than attacking a lone individual. Every attack could result in an injury that compromised its swimming ability or reduced bite strength. If some ancestral orcas targeted the same prey as the megalodon, there was direct competition for survival between these two entities in a context of resource scarcity. This hypothesis emphasizes the evolutionary advantage of group hunting. Predators can not only better protect their conspecifics but also develop strategies to drive off or outcompete rivals. To illustrate the power of the group, studies on modern orcas show that individuals coordinate to create destabilizing waves when hunting pinnipeds or sharks. Translated millions of years ago, these group hunting techniques would have made pods formidable rivals for the solitary megalodon. Another possible explanation for the decline lies in the decreasing genetic diversity within the megalodon population. When a species becomes too specialized and its distribution area decreases, it tends to cluster in isolated population niches. Under these conditions, genetic mixing declines and inbreeding may occur, increasing the risk of hereditary diseases and limiting the ability to adapt to environmental changes. Added to this are increased food competition, the need to migrate farther for breeding or hunting grounds, and climatic limitations. It is likely that the megalodon experienced a demographic bottleneck. Some paleontologists also believe that extremely large species require greater geographic distribution to maintain healthy genetic diversity. The scarcity of recent megalodon fossils suggests a gradual population decline, possibly exacerbated by the lack of genetic variability. From a strictly evolutionary perspective, a species that dominated the oceans for millions of years may have seemed invulnerable. However, natural history is full of iconic examples of ultra-specialized creatures struggling to find viable alternatives when their environment changes. The megalodon, despite being a super-predator, was no exception. Changing conditions, cooling, competition, and resource scarcity demand adaptive flexibility, which is often lacking in large, long-lived animals. Decreased genetic diversity generally results in lower resistance to parasites, infections, or environmental fluctuations. For the megalodon, new marine parasites, the rapid evolution of competing species, and the emergence of diseases could have been fatal, especially if the residual population was already weakened by insufficient diet. Furthermore, if sexual maturity was delayed, between 10 and 15 years according to some estimates, and litters were limited, generational replacement became too slow to offset losses. If the megalodon's gigantic size could have been an advantage during periods of abundance, with great strength and access to large prey, the same characteristic could become a disadvantage when conditions worsened. In biology, this is sometimes referred to as the metabolic cost. The larger an organism, the more resources it requires to survive. In a context of shrinking food reserves and longer distances to travel, extreme size entails a higher risk of energy depletion. Thermal regulation for a shark of this scale could become more complex. Although sharks do not have warm blood like mammals, some can maintain locally higher temperatures in their muscles and organs, as is the case with the great white shark. For the megalodon, a high body mass imposed thermal inertia that could be beneficial in relatively warm and stable waters, but became disadvantageous if these waters cooled or became fragmented into non-adjacent sectors. Therefore, its morphology, once a guarantee of success, may have contributed to trapping it during sudden or alternating environmental changes. Contrary to the idea of sudden extinction, most researchers believe that the megalodon's disappearance was a process that lasted several 100,000 years or more. On a geological scale, this duration may seem brief, but for an animal that lived several decades, it corresponds to a slow decline, generation after generation. There was no single catastrophic event, such as a meteor impact or major volcanic eruption, that eradicated it immediately. Instead, extinction likely occurred through a domino effect. First, the regression of populations in peripheral areas, then a retreat to warmer central regions, and finally fragmentation into increasingly smaller groups until complete disappearance. Fossil records seem to attest that megalodon teeth, once present on every continent except Antarctica, became scarce around 3.6 million years ago and almost non-existent after 2.6 million years. This wide interval suggests that locally, some populations may have survived a bit longer in isolated areas as relics before disappearing completely. This gradual population decline is typical of large marine species, whose success depends on a stable food chain and vast territories. Once the ecosystem fragments, resilience decreases, making extinction inevitable. The final part of this story concerns the definitive proof of disappearance. It is true that the shark's cartilage-based skeleton, which is poorly preserved, makes fossil evidence scarce. Most discoveries rely on teeth, much more resistant, mineralized structures. However, the absence of fossils from 2.6 million years ago is the best argument to affirm that the megalodon has disappeared. Rare teeth, sometimes claimed to be recently fossilized upon analysis, turn out to be older than expected, or show geological evidence of stratigraphic displacement, meaning ancient teeth have been moved to younger sediments. In science, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, but the situation appears sufficiently clear for the scientific community. The megalodon has not inhabited our oceans for at least 2.6 million years. Some myths or urban legends suggest it could still survive in unexplored depths. However, living conditions in these abyssal zones, extreme pressure and scarcity of large prey, are incompatible with the supposed physiology of such a colossal predator. Moreover, in modern times, no verified sightings or evidence, such as a whale carcass with massive bite marks, have been formally recorded.